Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyam Voko, and on the show tonight,
those who have voted yes, 148, and those who have voted no, 214. Abstain. Hold on, honorable members. Abstention 2, and therefore the Section 891 inquiry will therefore not be proceeded with.
Ramaphosa survives, but not without some dissenting voices from within the ANC stating their positions.
As a disciplined member of the ANC, I vote yes.
And 3 days to go before the ANC's elective conference, we go beyond the election of officials and explore some of the policies that the party will be discussing and debating at Nasrec at the weekend.
This type of municipality that we're bringing about, we would want to ensure that service delivery is brought about to the people of Nelson Mandela, that there is political stability.
The mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, Retief Odendaal, up in arms after his administrative powers in the metro were changed. All that coming up on tonight's episode of the Watchdog, which starts right now.
Before we proceed with this process, we should be allowed to vote on your decision now.
It's a point of order, Honorable Shivambu.
It's an issue that we have to then deal with with that particular fashion. Please.
There's a point of order. Honorable Member, yes, you have the floor.
We are proposing division of the House on that question.
Please take your seat. I've noted you made your point.
And the division must be secret as well.
No, please take your seat, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, please.
Well, a bit of the drama that, of course, preceded both the debate and the voting that took place in Parliament today. As many of you would know by now, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa can breathe a sigh of relief, for now at least. This after efforts by some opposition parties in Parliament failed to adopt the Section 89 independent panel report. 148 MPs voted in favor of adopting the report, while 214 voted against the move. The independent panel probe found that President Ramaphosa may have a case to answer regarding the theft of about $580,000 from his Phala Phala farm in 2020. Well, my panel for this evening consists of political analysts, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi and Mr. Sandile Swana. Let's take you back to Parliament this afternoon, and that's where, among those who led the charge, of course, in support of President Cyril Ramaphosa against the motion that was tabled, and that was his Justice and Correctional Services Minister, Ronald Lamola. Take a listen to what he had to say as Parliament, the National Assembly, debated that motion this afternoon.
The standard is higher on sufficient evidence. The evidence must be there, it must be concrete. There must be no doubt that this evidence is here and is sufficient to commence this process of the impeachment process. We do not have that sufficient evidence. We do not have grounds to proceed with this debate, with the process to impeach a sitting president. Therefore, my friends from the opposition, I've got very good bad news for you. We will not support this report because it does not have what the rule says it must do. And I want to ask from the opposition, are you going to agree for your members to vote against the adoption of the report? can Mr. Steenhuisen free your members to vote, because we have now convinced them that there is no sufficient evidence to impeach the president. We now know, Honorable Zungula, free your other members. They must not proceed because there is no sufficient evidence. There is no reason for your members to proceed because there is no sufficient evidence. What is being said and used here is just to blackmail the ANC. That the ANC it does not want its members. The ANC has always been a constitutional organization, an organization that respects the constitution of this country. Like all members of the ANC, we are here debating because of the constitution. We are here to hold the president to account because of the constitution. We are here to hold all members of the executive ourselves because of the constitution. We respect it. That's why we are here. We are not running away from the debate. If the president wanted to run away from the debate, he would have also interdicted the debate. But the president just took the matter on review to show that he has got grounds. He does not agree with the report. But he does not stop this parliament from debating. He says this parliament must continue, it must debate, it must hold the president to account. And that is what we are doing.
Mr. Swana, was it about sufficient evidence?
No, Vuyo, this is, the minister is mistaken big time here. The words indeed are written there, sufficient evidence, but when you reflect as Judge Sandile Ngobo reflected on this matter, think about it logically. This is a preliminary process to say, do these accusations tie up with any law? Do these accusations tie up with any face value evidence, so that we can constitute an inquiry that will gather the sufficient evidence? You cannot have two processes whose purpose is to gather sufficient evidence. The sufficient evidence is needed in the next phase, not in phase one. And that is what was argued quite eloquently in the written panel report. Secondly, there is the other issue that they do raise. The sufficient evidence that they say is missing actually is the evidence that is in possession of President Cyril Ramaphosa. For instance, the identity, the precise identity of the buyer, the precise amount of money that was received from the so-called buyer, the confirmation documents that this money was entered into South Africa lawfully and was cleared by customs and cleared at the Reserve Bank, and so on. That evidence sat with President Ramaphosa, and he did not submit it.
Dr. Tsalapedi?
No, I agree. Definitely the issue around sufficient evidence is not the competency of the independent panel. That's the investigation that are supposed to be taken by the panel or committee that's constituted then by Parliament. So I think the minister is quite wrong, the member of Parliament is quite wrong, and I think obviously it's politicking. You know, you look at Parliament and the way in which these people voted. Of course, Parliament must apply itself in a manner that is rational, and they're able to justify the decisions that that is able to withstand the courts. But I think there's also quite clearly that there are political interests here at play, and I think people should stop playing around with the issue of whether now we are disciplined members or whether we are taking ethical positions and so forth. I think for me, the most glaring issue from this Phala Phala matter is the fact that there is an amount of money, a foreign currency that's held by the president that's quite clearly unlawful given the extent of that money. And I think that on its own constitutes prima facie evidence that there must be on the part of Parliament to constitute a panel that does investigation. Because part of the problem here is that then you are, I think, undoing the good work that SARS has been doing all along post the state capture. You are doing the good work, I think, that also the Reserve Bank has been doing. And I think they need to also be able to clarify themselves on these issues. So with regards to those institutions, I think that Phala Phala does sort of weaken, I think, at least on the part of citizens, that trust in these institutions. So this matter really needs to be put to bed.
In fact, I mean, here's how the leader of the official opposition, John Steenhuisen, put it in his speech. In other words, what today was about, certainly from where the official opposition stands.
So I ask that every member thinks carefully about what today's vote means. We're not voting to find a president innocent or guilty. We're not weighing up evidence to reach a verdict. That will only happen later. Today is about letting due process take its course. It's about acknowledging, as the authors of the report did, that there are big questions that remain unanswered, and that it can only be solved by an inquiry undertaken by this House. And that is the test before us today.
Correct, isn't he, Mr. Sona?
Yes, unfortunately, Steenhuisen is being abused by his colleagues to explain something that they know is true, because they wrote this set of rules themselves. The members of parliament wrote these rules and adopted them themselves, so that there are two preliminary steps. One is that the speaker, when she receives, in this case it's a lady, when she receives the complaint from whoever is complaining, she must check if the complaint is in order. So she did check and found the complaint to be in order and convened the panel. And that panel was to check if, on a preliminary basis, does it look like there's a case that still needs to be investigated? Which is now what today's meeting was about, to say, indeed, on a preliminary basis, it looks like there's smoke there. Can we check if indeed there's a fire? And that is what Steenhuisen is explaining to people who already know what he is explaining. And that is an abuse of their colleague, what they were doing to Steenhuisen.
Dr. Lapedi, I mean, let's listen to what some others in the opposition had to say on, this very same matter. Now, from where they stood, you know, what today is all about. EFF leader Julius Malema also participating in the debate. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
You stand as the greatest enemy of constitutionalism and accountability. As a so-called architect of the Constitution, you have resolved to take Parliament of South Africa to court to avoid constitutional obligation of accountability. As a so-called crafter of our democratic dispensation, you are accused of engaging in activities that characterized a criminal underworld. As a so-called champion of accountability to masses of our people, you today avoid scrutiny and questioning like a fugitive. Mr. President, your reluctance to allow inquiry into the activities of Phala Phala Farm are shocking and concerning. You are so desperate to avoid any type of investigation into the crimes that have occurred at and in relation to a Phala Phala Farm that you have decided to spit in the face of the freedoms and institutions so many fought and died for. It is concerning because it means worse has happened in the farm that you do not want people of South Africa to know. Instead of using the process of the impeachment inquiry to clear your name, you have mobilized your party to fight against an attempt to discover the truth of what happened in Phala Phala Farm.
Of course, I mean, the opposition have been, well, in the main, together on this one. And before you come in, Dr. Lapedi, I want you to listen also to what the leader of the ATM, you know, who has really been one of the key people really driving this, what he had to say during that debate as well.
It would be a travesty of justice if Parliament takes a resolution that the President should not be given an opportunity to clear his name with such serious allegations hanging over his head. It is only Parliament that is empowered to investigate the constitutional breaches and acts of misconduct of the President. The Parliament cannot be told to wait for the investigations of the Hawks, NPA, Reserve Bank and SARS. The heads of these institutions are all appointed by the President. It is only Parliament that is not at the mercy of the President, as our stay here is dependent on the people who elected us to hold the executive accountable. The independent panel report merely states there may be violations to the Constitution. The impeachment committee may agree with the submissions of the President, and the case will be closed, unless, of course, the President has got something to hide. The only rational resolution Parliament can take is to have the impeachment committee. So all of the things the President is raising in a wrong forum, which is the Constitutional Court, can be dealt with here in Parliament. The Parliament commissioned a panel of experts. These experts concluded that Parliament may investigate the matter further. How can Parliament reject a report from a panel it mandated to look into the matter? A rejection of the report means Parliament is violating its constitutional mandate of oversight and accountability.
Your take?
I mean, these are definitely straightforward things. I think the issue of the fact that President Cyril Ramaphosa was one of the contributors to our constitutional architecture, it's obviously quite an embarrassment on his part that he's now one of the people that's flouting those rules constitutionally and legally. And I think the member of the opposition party, again, is quite correct that the president does not need to have a review at the level of the Constitutional Court. Perhaps part of the fear is this naming of the committee, the impeachment committee. But the reality of the matter is that the impeachment committee is then tasked to investigate what happened. They're going to look at customs at OR Tambo, they're going to look at SARS, what happened there, they're going to look at what's happened with Phala Phala, they're going to look at SABC. And obviously the issues around Namibia, what happened there with the discussions between the SABC and the president. So all of those things will come into play, and I think it's going to be brought into the light. What's quite clear is that the ANC is not interested, similar to the State Capture Commission, to have their issues sort of hanging out in the dry. I mean, especially now they're going into elective conference. There will be next year, they're going to again to a national elections. So obviously all of these things are playing at play here. But I think the most dangerous thing that's come out, at least in the discourse from ANC members with regards to this issue of Phala Phala, is the thinking that, given that President Cyril Ramaphosa is quite more liked outside of the ANC, more than the ANC members, so it's better to have him, given that once they go with his candidacy at national elections, they're able to win. I think that's quite dangerous. And I think most importantly, it undermines how citizens will vote. I think citizens have quite a number of options, according to them. And this idea that they need to hold on to the president, if indeed he has flouted the Constitution, to protect or to push the agenda of anti-corruption, which is basically how he's come on to national prominence in the form of the president. I think that's quite wrong, and I think that's quite demeaning to ordinary citizens. But certainly opposition parties are quite correct on this matter. But again, I think it underlines the politicized nature of Parliament.
Well, of course, I mean, Mr. Swana, I mean, the job of sweeping was left to, on the part of the ANC. Mr. Janji, who, as you know, is also the man chairing that inquiry into the public protector's fitness to hold office. And none of the things that the opposition had to say clearly convinced the ANC to rethink its stance. Take a listen to a bit of what Mr. Janji had to say. And we're playing him also because, I mean, as Vuyo Zungula was speaking there, he's the one who kept shaking his head, obviously disagreeing with virtually everything that Vuyo Zungula of the ATM had to say. Take a listen.
Our disapproval of this report is not to stop accountability by the president. Instead, the president should continue to be accountable to Parliament. The independent panel does confirm that they have not tested the validity of the evidence as alleged in affidavit of Mr. Fraser. The panel also declared detailed limitations imposed on them by the process, yet their conclusions are not congruent or consistent with the information that they had. An impeachment process of the president removal must be based on substantive prima facie evidence. We call on all South Africans not to be conjured up by the media and opposition hype. It's moments like these that we test our ability as a nation to navigate these complexities. These hypocrites think that they have a firm grip on the ANC and its life. The panel report fell short of minimum threshold to lead us into an impeachment. The issue here is the test in the rules is sufficient evidence, not prima facie evidence. In other words, the test to be applied is much higher than prima facie, as Honorable Lamula would have indicated. No matter how many times you repeat these accusations, they will not stick or become true because of their repetition.
What is often interesting, I mean, for me, Mr. Swana, during these debates, is that a lot of people tend to stick to the script and rarely ever pick up, on perhaps some of the weaknesses or the weaker arguments presented by others, and thus capitalize on that. It felt like the ANC was just sticking to the script and not exploiting whatever loopholes there may have been, certainly on the part of the adversaries.
Yes, unfortunately, we can end up saying many unkind things after listening to this. I hope you noticed that in his statement himself, being one of the most trusted intellectuals in the ANC, that he uses the word substantive prima facie evidence and also as substantial evidence in the same argument. He's all over the show in his own argument, which Mbeki has warned them that since the 1990s, the intellectual standard of the African National Congress has been declining, which then makes them unable to engage in debate, to take on board the arguments of the opposition and the arguments of Sandile Ngcobo and his team, because there's a section where Sandile Ngcobo deals in detail with this issue of prima facie evidence, that it is unlikely, actually, that the powers that he has been given, the time that he has been given, which are written up front, that within 30 days he must write. So this is a dipstick part of the investigation. It's totally preliminary. And to me, there is hard evidence that says if Ramaphosa has admitted that a buyer arrived on Christmas Day and met Mr. Ndlovu on the premises, so why didn't Ramaphosa get a full sworn affidavit from Mr. Ndlovu himself and from the farm manager who is at his disposal and submit it as to what happened there? So all of those things are not being addressed, that Sandile Ngcobo understood that the evidence that is missing right now is the evidence that is with Ramaphosa, and the impeachment committee has got sufficient powers to actually get Ramaphosa to release that evidence. So those types of things are not being engaged, but a script that is steamrolling and just making statements so that the process finishes and they can vote and use majoritarianism rather than the power and force of sound argument to win a debate in Parliament. No, they just want to vote and win after just saying statements that are baseless and incoherent.
Of course, the opposition wasn't alone. It was joined by a handful of ANC MPs, chief among them, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who has made it known that she wants to be the first woman president of the ANC.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely interesting, obviously, because I think in one part, she and others have isolated themselves. And it was obviously quite clear that the ANC wanted to see its own members vote publicly. So that once they go back to Lutile House, they're able to say, well, here are these 5 that voted this way. And obviously it's against the discipline of the ANC, given that democratic centralism was imposed at the level of Parliament. But obviously I don't think again, it's an issue of her saying, well, this is a principled matter. I'm standing on the basis that, I'm making a decision here that's principled. I think there are obviously political interests here at play. She has a vested interest at the National Conference of the ANC as well. So she also needs to say where her position is. I think for me, what stands out are that the people who did not say where their vote lies, people like Bomme Sisulu and Tatezeli Mkhize. I think for me that was quite interesting that they were not there in the room to put up their voice, given that they also have a vested interest at the National Electoral Conference now this weekend. But we'll see what the president does. It's unlikely that he will be taking them out of cabinet. That's definitely not. That's not been modus operandi. He'll keep them on. But I think obviously the pretext will be this national conference. There'll be new NEC members. Inevitably, they'll constitute a new cabinet in the next national elections.
Mr. Swana, do you think what happened today or what Dr. Dlamini Zuma did today will do anything to her fortunes, fate? Has it signed her fate or future? Or is what has happened up until now what has happened, really? Nothing is going to change that.
I think that I think there are ways in which you can say it seals her fate. First of all, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is probably one of the people in terms of her age and longevity in the ANC who would have been expected, like the likes of Mavuso Msimang or the Thabo Mbekis, to be able to say the line of truth and integrity travels right here. Don't miss the line. So from that point of view, she's made a mark for her legacy. Given her age, whether she wants to stay or leave is neither here nor there. But I think to some, at least, she would have said, taken a clear moral stand where the ANC was losing track. As to whether Ramaphosa, I think this weekend, let me add this. What I can say about what happened with those dissenters, the ANC dissenters, what they are telling you is that sparks are going to fly. To me, it was an announcement that sparks are going to fly at Nasrec inside the ANC conference itself, and that this battle within the ANC, let alone what the opposition is going to do, the battle is still going to go on. And there is a big problem that has now been created to say they want a report from SAB to come in, a report from the Hawks and what have you. And we don't know what makes them so confident that it is better to read those reports than to read this one of the panel. Are they manipulating that? What are they doing? So there's going to be a lot of fights that are still going to unfold. And Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is going to be at the forefront of those fights.
Mr. Sandla Swana, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, thanks to both of you for coming on this evening. Well, sparks may fly at the weekend, as Mr. Swana is saying, but that conference is also meant to go beyond the election of officials and explore some of the policies that the party has or hopes to implement for our country. Up next, we're looking at some of those policies that will be tabled before that conference at the weekend. The ANC heads to its national conference in 3 days, and while there is robust discourse around the election of a new party leadership, tonight we shift the focus a little to some of the policies that will be under discussion at the weekend conference. And joining me now is a member of the ANC's Communications, Economics and Transformation Committees, and that's Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. Minister, good evening. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to you and your viewers for you.
Well, with everything that has been going on in the run-up to this conference, including, of course, the drama we saw this afternoon in Parliament, I think South Africans would be forgiven for thinking, there won't be much by way of policy discussions there at that conference at the weekend.
Actually, it is to the contrary. the conversations are mostly focused on policy issues. Remember, it's not about leadership, it's what we are confronted with as a party in terms of dealing with unemployment. We've got a high rate of unemployment, we've got a high rate of poverty, a number of South Africans can no longer afford themselves, but also the economy has to grow. And also in that growing of the economy, the global economy is changing to become digital. So we have to, as a party, focus on our policies to make sure that we grow the economy, we create jobs, we to deal with unemployment, but also to deal with poverty. That is primarily what we are going to be focused and concentrated on as the ANC. Because remember, we are a governing party, and if we don't focus on that, we cannot then rebuild this economy of our country. In particular, when we are recovering, or the globe is recovering from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So a part of those things that we are working on, you'll recall that we have done the economic recovery and redevelopment policy of government, and that will be subjected again to the ANC policy discussion of saying, how do we deal with the youth unemployment? How do we create more jobs? And the focus has been, what are those sectors that we must grow to deal with jobs? And I want to speak from the communications perspective to say we are now focusing on how do we build digital skills in our society, in particular amongst the youth and women, to make sure that they can be able to respond. So we are going to focus on the extent of the programs to deal with poverty and unemployment, because behind the poverty and unemployment is the scourge of gender-based violence and child abuse, when women are helpless and they cannot leave abusive relationships. So to deal with that societal issue, we must restructure the economy, but also prepare ourselves, our people, to be ready to take opportunities in the economy, not only as employment seekers, but as job creators. I'll give an example. There's a resolution around the state bank, and I want to report back that we're 90% almost there to getting the post bank to become a state bank. And that resolution comes from the 52nd conference of the ANC. And now we are at the cusp of delivering the state bank as that. And why is it important in terms of the state bank and economic transformation? It's important for a few things. One, majority of South Africans are excluded financially. So the participation of the post bank as a state bank will extend financial inclusion to our people, not only banking them or banking the unbanked, but also giving financial support to small businesses, to black-owned businesses, to businesses in general, as part of those interventions that the financial sector must make. In fact, I want to remind you. Okay, go ahead.
In fact, I mean, you've just taken us straight to, some of those issues I actually wanted to explore with you, because the reason many people don't believe that these conversations do actually take place at these conferences, or they do so meaningfully, it's precisely because of your inability as the governing party to make some serious inroads in the areas of economic transformation, dealing with poverty, dealing with unemployment in the country. I mean, over the past about 3 or so weeks, every day as you count down to our conference, you've been highlighting issues every day. And this is one of the key issues that you've highlighted over the past couple of weeks. And the reason people are skeptical about both whether you do actually have these meaningful conversations, or you are making inroads in both the way you think about them and in your ability to implement your own resolutions, is because of the lack of progress.
I think we need to acknowledge that we have been slow on the delivery part, but there should be an acknowledgement that there has been, during the 54th ANC leadership, there has been an acceleration in terms of delivering on those long outstanding resolutions. And I'll give the sector that we are in terms of communications, the spectrum that was due to be released or auctioned to be ready for 2010 has now been done. The digital migration that it was also supposed to have been ready by 2010, we are at the cusp of delivering it. The state bank that I said, it comes from the 52nd resolution, it's also almost there. The bill was debated in the portfolio committee recommended for Parliament, and it's only for Parliament to process it. And our applications is ready to submit to the Prudential Authority or the Reserve Bank for that to be considered. So we have been moving. There have been a step up in terms of delivering on those resolutions. And you're correct, everybody's correct in criticizing us of having very good policy positions, but lacking implementation. But we need to make an acknowledgement that despite the challenges of the 54th ANC leadership, we have been able to deliver on those long outstanding challenges in policy decisions in the country. And that's why we're focused on that. We're focused on repositioning the economy of the country, and we have moved deliberately on that. Not that there are no challenges. There have been many challenges in those implementation. We have seen what the court did with the BEE regulations in particular. You have seen what the continuous attack on transformational policies by the right, the extreme right. But we have come back and said, how do we make sure that businesses are supported? How do we make sure that we diversify the economy? Yes, there have been challenges in terms of infrastructure development, and we have gone out, if you recall what they've been happening with copper. We've gone out as government and said, no, there cannot be exportation of copper. We are going to finalize the rules and the regulations of how the copper in this country gets managed so that we protect key critical infrastructure. And those are part of the work that we've done. We've said we must build yes, we have challenges of load shedding, but we've said we also have challenges of water. We said we must build more dams, we must reticulate, and that has happened. And the reticulation progress is there. The president just visited a dam in Guyana, where they're going to finalize. We have a closing date of finalizing the pumping of water from Nandoni Dam to Nsami Dam in Guyana to make sure that there is water, and therefore there can be industrial development linked to that, to the water schemes.
But I mean, as many people, I mean, this is an issue that they've raised, whether you're talking about water and sanitation, whether you're talking about the problems we're seeing in municipalities across the country. You're not going to do this. I mean, you're not going to deliver the water if we have, you know, the rate of, I mean, so many senior officials of municipalities, but also of departments, you know, this revolving door where one is here for a few months, they're out because they can't agree with the political pressure that someone is breathing on their necks for this or the other tender. We don't have skills at local level because, I mean, professionals avoid that space like a plague because they know the consequences, you know, of getting into that space. Lots of political pressure, dispensing of patronage. They can't do their jobs because of political and other pressures.
I think what we need to clarify is that we have been committed on the professionalization of the public service across and working on the single public service. And I'm sure you recall that around October, Cabinet announced a decision that the tenure of DGs is going to be 10 years instead of 5 years to give them some level of protection. And that work is going to be done to extend the same protection to senior public servants in the municipal space as part of creating a single public service in South Africa. And I think that's part of stabilization or professionalizing the public service so that public servants can be preoccupied with executing the work that has been set in their performance plans and the targets of the government, whether it's a local government, provincial or national government. But also what we need to do is to make sure that they don't feel intimidated because somebody can unilaterally terminate their contracts. But linked to that is an introduction of a performance management system that will make sure that those who do not perform can then be held accountable for their performance, and they can be what do you say? I don't know what to say. Be fired. They can be removed from the public service because they are not performing. Because it doesn't mean that all the time the political leadership is wrong. Sometimes you do not have a management that is performing. So we must link performance and security of job tenure, but also with service delivery. Okay. And also we're starting to have the questions of do clean audits really give us service delivery? Do they make an impact on service delivery? And we need to have that balance on governance, on skills, but also on service delivery and making impact on the lives of our people.
But also account, of course, for public monies that are spent there. But 5 days ago, Minister, you posted the ANC, that is, the ANC supports a universal basic income grant to meet basic needs and reduce unsustainable wealth and income inequality. Now, this issue has took prominence this year, but it's been interesting how your comrades have deferred to Treasury and the officials there. And whenever you ask, but why aren't you making, movement, any significant movement, on this particular issue, they talk about how they are being held to ransom by conservative forces within Treasury. At what point do you say, you are in charge, you are the governing party? So this is a resolution that you've taken knowing fully well or appreciating the consequences of it on the national fiscus, but broadly, the impact it will have on trying to, make a dent to poverty in this country. But it keeps delaying. There's lack of decisiveness. Right now, no one is actually sure where the government and the ANC in particular stands on this one.
Look, I think we are clear that resolution is in place, but there's the modalities of its implementation. We have agreed that it cannot burden the fiscus, that's one, but also it cannot create a nation that is dependent on grants. We must also put a system that will clear the social net, and there's a discussion both in cabinet and within the ANC in terms of the modalities of implementing, where you don't then burden the fiscus by young people are dependent on grants, but who do not go out to seek work or who do not meaningfully contribute to the economy. Grants cannot be the be-all and end-all solution of South Africa, but we must create meaningful participation and contribution and dignity to our people. And that's how that's what we are focusing on, the modalities of understanding that our people need some level of intervention or mediation in terms of grants, but when that is implemented, it doesn't create a grant-dependent society. We're not a social welfare state. We are a developmental state, and there's a difference between a welfare state and a developmental state, and that's where the balance must be found.
Okay, Khumbuzo Ntshaweni, let's leave it there for this evening. She's a member of the ANC's National Executive Committee, but also a member of several subcommittees of the ANC. We're going to continue over the next few days to explore some of the policies that are going to be debated at the ANC's conference that's coming up in a couple of days' time. For now, though, we're going to move to this issue. Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality will now be run through a collective executive system combined with a ward participatory system, changing from the mayoral executive system that is currently in force. On the line, we're joined by the man whose role within the municipality will be directly affected by this, and that's Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor Retief Odendaal. Good evening, Mayor. Thanks very much for your time. Well, it's been coming. It's been a long time coming, this decision. And after a great deal of consultation, certainly from what the MEC told us last night, he has now reached a decision, and that is to do away with the executive mayor system. Your reaction?
Well, I don't know about a great deal of consultation, because there's been no consultation with the city. I can assure you that. There was only one meeting that the MEC had with council. Council rejected the proposal, and there was a decision that the MEC and his officials made to come back to council and to consult with political parties. That didn't happen. But that's besides the point, because on the 23rd of September, I entered into an intergovernmental relations dispute with the MEC, because I believe that the basis for his decision and his argument was flawed. All of the decisions all of the reasons for his decisions to proceed with this process were met at that stage, so it was nonsensical. And he hasn't dealt with the intergovernmental relations dispute. In fact, he hasn't even acknowledged the dispute. And on the 28th of November, I was still trying to make contact with his personal assistant, communicating with her via WhatsApp. And we still haven't had a meeting to deal with this. So I think that it's very clear to us that it's a political decision, and I'll see the MEC in court if he's not willing to deal with the IGR processes. It's all about ensuring that we have stability in Nelson Mandela Bay, and if the MEC has done this for the right reasons, he certainly has not put the interest of the city first.
Well, he says stability is the real reason he has taken this decision. He says there's been instability all along. Decisions can't be taken. Right now, more than 250 million rands has had to be sent back, or you're no longer going to get it in conditional grants, precisely because meetings have not been sitting, precisely because of that instability. He goes further to say, to an issue you've raised, that he has actually consulted, I think he counted more than 27 entities, community organizations, and so on, that he says he has consulted. And your party did make submissions as well, from what I understand. And besides, the law, actually, Section 12, provides for this arrangement.
No, but you must remember that this has never been done in South Africa before. They have never changed the system of government within a municipality after local government elections. The COGTA has not consulted with SALGA. They have not consulted with the city. It will plunge the city in absolute chaos. So I think that the MEC is just being disingenuous. The real reason is they are doing this for political expediency reasons. They've lost control of the city. You mentioned the 242 million rand that the city has lost. That 242 million rand was lost under an ANC government in Nelson Mandela Bay. We are picking up the pieces as we are speaking. All of the instability that happened in Nelson Mandela Bay happened under the watch of the ANC. And it is clear that in the Eastern Cape, you can look at the track record of the service delivery by the ANC. Half of our municipalities are bankrupt. They look like there is a low level of a civil war happening in them. That is how broken they are, and the level of service delivery that you can experience in those municipalities. Here in Nelson Mandela Bay, we're picking up the pieces that the ANC left. And we are not going to allow the ANC to take this municipality via the back door. A week after we took over here, their regional chair was arrested on criminal charges for defrauding the administration. This is the kind of administration that the ANC wants here. We will not allow it. We will follow due process. Yes, the MEC is within his rights to invoke Section 12, but he will have to do so responsibly, follow the letter of the law. And where there is a IGR disputes, it has to be dealt with. And he refuses to deal with them. So I'll see him in court and I will win, because I'm not going to back down out of this IGR dispute, because I'm putting the interest of the city first, together with our coalition partners, and the ANC just wants to hijack this administration.
Okay. Now, I did ask him, obviously, whether this was about political expediency, which, he obviously denied. But among the issues, I understand, other parties or entities raised was the fact that the system currently gives undue powers and unfair advantage to small parties that really are voted in by small numbers of people, whereas this system, Section 12, actually forces, especially you big parties, to work together in the interests of the communities. Because as things stand, if this goes ahead, you are most likely to have about 4 members of the executive. The ANC will also have 4, and the EFF will probably have about 2 or so, which then forces all 3 of you, the biggest parties in the metro, to work together, forget about your difference, and talk about how you're going to give people water, electricity, clean up the streets, sewerage, and all of that.
Well, Leo, I think I must make it very clear that the ANC must get used to the fact that coalition governments are here to stay. And the only reason why the ANC deem coalition partners as problematic is because they are greedy. They have no idea how to work with other political parties because they're obsessed with power and with money. And I want to also make it clear that we have been working in Nelson Mandela Bay within the biggest coalition that has ever existed in the country, a 10-party coalition. It's not easy. It's certainly not easy. But at the end of the day, we are managing to govern Nelson Mandela Bay far better than the ANC were able to do it. And it's because we put our own party political issues separate. The ANC is the problem, not the coalition partners. I want to make it clear that even a big coalition, such as the one that we have here in Nelson Mandela Bay, is far better than any government with the ANC. I mean, you should see how corrupt our administrators and our politicians have become in the Eastern Cape. If you shake them, if you give them the hand, you're lucky if your wristwatch is still on it after you've given them the hand. So we're certainly not prepared to work with the ANC, and we're not going to give the city back to an ANC government that has facilitated grand-scale looting here in Nelson Mandela Bay.
But I mean, is it not better to work with 2 or 3 other political parties than it is to work with a whole group of political parties, one of whom can wake up the one day, which has been the case, this has been happening in that part of our country, where one councillor stands up and says, I'm sick and tired of this, I'm no longer part of it, then crosses over to the other side. And this is what has actually brought about instability in Nelson Mandela Bay. Is it not easier to forget your difference? In fact, do you not stand a better chance to hold the ANC to account when it's the 3 of you in a room and you know exactly what they are doing or they intend doing, and you are able to stop that?
Well, one must also understand that in Nelson Mandela Bay, there will be 4 parties within a collective executive. It is the DA, the ANC, the EFF, and the Northern Alliance. And as things stand at the moment, it will be a hung council yet again. So our problems are not going to be going away. We're still going to be very much a hung council, whereas in the current coalition arrangement, we actually have a majority government in Nelson Mandela Bay. So the difference here is that the MEC wants a government where the ANC is included in. And I think that the issue is we have seen what ANC governments have brought to Nelson Mandela Bay, and it's brought us dysfunctionality, it's brought us chaos, and it's brought us corruption, and we're not going to go down that route. I go back to the issue that I was in the legislature with many of my colleagues that are MECs. I wrote to them personally about other interventions that they could stage in Nelson Mandela Bay. Section 154 interventions, Section 139 interventions. None of that was implemented because they had no interest to do so, because there was an ANC-led government here. But the moment that the DA announced together with its coalition partners that it's formed a new coalition, then they issued a notice for Section 12 to take effect. And I'm assured by my colleagues at a national level, it's going to follow suit in other municipalities where we've got a coalition government. Okay. So it is clear this is a political ploy. It's got nothing to do about the stability of Nelson Mandela Bay. There's now far more stability than there's ever been under an ANC government in Nelson Mandela Bay. Okay. This is about taking over government via the back door. One has to respect the outcome of our elections. Okay. And it gave us a number of smaller parties that became potential coalition partners. Yes, if they want to go out of the coalition, there's nothing that you can do about it. Okay. That's democracy. That's the results we got from the electorate.
Well, we've seriously run out of time, but I have to ask you this. Have you filed already, or you're in the process of doing that?
No, we're in the process of filing, and we're hoping that within the next couple of days that will happen. I'm also hoping that the MEC will still make contact with me. Also make contact with the city, because I don't know what he expects. How the city must be able to implement something that hasn't been communicated at all. He hasn't even reached out to one of the political parties other than his formal Gazette notice. And I mean, that means absolutely nothing. That's just the official notice. There must be arrangements made as to how this administration must be done.
Okay, let me thank you very much for coming through this evening. That's the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, following, of course, that decision taken by the MEC of local government in the Eastern Cape that there will no longer be an executive mayoral system, but rather an executive system consisting of the biggest parties who will co-govern that municipality. We'll see, of course, what comes out of the process, legal process that the mayor says they are in the process of launching. That's our show for tonight. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.